Hello, good to see you all. And yeah, this is hopefully the last online lesson. On Thursday, we're going to be back in person, so that's going to be good. It's looking like the ice is melting, and we've got through this mega crisis, which is good. Okay, so today we're going to, start off the first lesson of week three, which is all about the subject of supply and demand. And just so you know, I'll put this up on the announcement, but I've opened all the week two assignments till Wednesday at midnight for those that have been asking for extra time. Okay, so let's go without further ado, get into supply and demand. I know you're busy and you just want something punchy because I'm seeing that not everyone is actually looking at these videos. So I'm trying to make them as punchy as I can, but it is difficult. Okay, so supply and demand is in some senses the great concept that uh, economics has brought to the world, that the interaction of the forces of supply and demand create price. And you probably have some idea of what that means, but we're going to look at it formally today, or probably more formally on Thursday, but I'll lay the foundations today. Okay, so the learning objectives will be describing how demand and supply curves summarize the behavior of buyers and sellers in the market, how those come together to create equilibrium price and quantity, and then we'll look at how shifts in either the supply or the demand curve causes prices and quantity to change, and we'll be looking at how various principles, especially the efficiency principle or the equilibrium principle or the no cash on the table principle, which is another word for the equilibrium principle, works out as we look at this model. So before we sort of look at supply and demand, let's look at some sort of big questions. Basically, every society, and this is sort of macro, but then it's also worked out in terms of micro, that every society has to answer three basic questions. Which goods will be produced? How much of each? How? Which technology? Which resources are used? And for whom? How are outputs distributed? Is it based on the need of the person, or is it based on whether they have the ability to pay? You may see where this is going, And if you think about it, most societies sort of work this out through some interaction between these forces, some sort of government central planning or the market, or a mixture of them too. So central planning is very much a decision group by group of individuals or small groups, agrarian societies, government programs of the old Soviet system. You would set prices and goals for the group, and your ability of an individual to influence the economy is limited. In the market, it's all about buyers and sellers and the signals they create. And resources and goods are allocated accordingly based on people's demand versus people's ability to demand, and obviously having the money to demand goods, and people's ability to supply those goods. And so the three basic questions in a market economy are answered by the interaction of supply and demand. Okay, now you probably think, in your mind, America is a market economy, and Cuba or North Korea are a centrally planned economy, or China. But you'd probably be a bit wrong to think that, because in some senses, there's never been a fully centrally planned economy in human history, and there's never been a fully market economy. Everything is mixed, really, and every economy is some sort of mix between these two types of things, and so two types of central planning or market. And so ultimately, the question is, do they veer more towards the market? And probably the US economy does. Or does it veer towards more central planning? Somewhere like China does, but there's a lot of market forces in China, and there's a lot of government intervention in the United States. So ultimately, there's these forces of buyers the demanders, and there's these forces of sellers, which are the suppliers. And they're brought together in this thing we call a market. And we'll be talking about markets in all sorts of different ways through this class. But ultimately, a market is basically anything that brings together buyers and sellers. And I'll both have different motivations. Buyers want to benefit from a good. They want to enjoy that good. Sellers want to make a profit from that good. That's two very different forces, but they're interacting in a market. And the market price brings a balance between these two forces. It's on the one hand, there's a value buyers derive from the good, and then there's the other side, there's the cost to produce the good, and somehow they come together through the magic of the market and the creation of the market price through the interaction of supply and demand. And so, I know some of you are like, when you look at graphs, you think, but this is probably the classic graph where we see on the vertical axis price, and we look on the horizontal axis, and that's quantity, and this is what's called a demand curve. And this is really saying that as the price goes up for pizzas in this case, you're going to demand less. At $2, you're going to demand 16,000 slices a day. This could be for everyone, And at $4, people demand 8,000 slices a day. Very simple, very, very simple human context or concept that's been placed into this model. That's what we do in economics. We create something that's very complex and there's all sorts of elements to it, and we narrow it down and say, look, the most important factor that's driving the demand for pizzas is the price. Now you can say, hey, what about the type of pizza? What about whether they like pizzas or not? What about, it's all sorts of questions, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But the supply and demand model at root is an analysis between the quantity demanded, in this case with the demand curve, and the price. Now, we'll also look at the supply curve, and it's the same thing, And as we can see, consumers buy less at higher prices, consumers buy more at lower prices. Okay, so, and the buyers value goods differently, Maybe you're someone that would buy a pizza slice at $2, but wouldn't at $4. But then there's other people that, they'd buy, pizzas if they went up to $5. Each person has a different, what's called a buyer's reservation price. It's the highest price an individual is willing to pay for a good. But because the demand reflects the entire market, there's going to be all sorts of people along that. If you think about it here, along this line, there's people that would only buy maybe, a pizza slice when it's sort of $1.50. But then there's also people that are, are prepared to buy it when it's $6. Let's say if the line went up to $6. And so there's a whole mixture of people that are modeled in this demand curve, obviously lower prices hence bring some of those more buyers into the market, people that only would buy at a very low price. Lower prices cause existing buyers to buy more. Okay, now there's two things going on, and this is a little bit difficult, so you might not get it, and you might need to sort of discuss it in class on Thursday. Buyers tend to buy more at lower prices and buy less at higher prices. And so why is that? There's two things that what happens when the price goes up. If you think about it, if the price of a good goes up, let's say you've got a particular, let's say you like to have some pizza every day, a little slice of pizza each day, and the price is $4. Now, if it's $4, you think, well, maybe there's something that I really enjoy for $3, which is better off. Now it's gone up to $4. Let's go to the thing that's $3, and that's called the substitution effect. And the other thing is that also you've got what's called the income effect. If you're someone like, I need my pizza, even if it's $4, I'm going to have that pizza. And you have a slice of pizza each day, that's $28 you're spending a week on pizza. And so that's money, because let's say the price has gone up from $2 to $4, that's money you can't be spending on other things. So when there's a price rise, there's two things going on: the substitution effect and the income effect, so how do we interpret the demand curve? We sort of think, okay, given price, how much will buyers buy? At a price of $4, the quantity demanded is 8,000 slices a day. Now we can think about it in that way. That's called the horizontal, because we're thinking about it in terms of price. But what do you think the vertical thing would be about? Given the quantity to be sold, what price is the marginal consumer willing to pay? So the vertical interpretation assumes if you want to sell that 8,000th slice, what is the price you need to get? So first is like the vertical way of interpreting it is, okay, based on the price, what quantity do we get? The vertical interpretation is based on the quantity, what price do we need to charge? So if you think about it, and this is a little bit deep, the horizontal interpretation, horizontal interpretation is very much from the buyer's point of view, but the vertical interpretation is very much from the seller's point of view, because they want to sell those extra sort of amounts, Okay, that's the demand curve. And we're going to go through this all again. We'll go through all this several times. And so that, basically the supply curve, demand curve is what people are prepared to buy at certain different prices. The supply curve is what people are prepared to sell at different prices. And obviously that's based on the opportunity cost. If you think about it, if you're like, okay, I can sell this pizza for $2, but I'm actually losing money on it. So I could be doing better with my time. The opportunity cost of it is going to be sort of greater. It's like selling pizza at $2 a piece, a slice, is actually I could be selling something else for $3. So if the opportunity cost of the person selling is higher, the price that they need to satisfy the sale will be higher. And obviously different people have different opportunity costs. You often see, don't you, that especially in the realm of fast food and stuff like that, increasingly, it usually is new immigrants that come in because they're prepared to do it cheaper, because they don't have as much going on in their lives as people that may have been here for 1 or 2 generations and have built up businesses and capital and things like that, And so the opportunity cost, among sellers is different due to technology, different rents, maybe different expectations, different skills, And so ultimately the low-hanging fruit principle explains the upward sloping supply curve. So as prices go up, more people are going to jump in, more people are going to sell. That's the low-hanging fruit. If you think you can get a sale, it's like, oh, there's money to be made in pizza because prices are high. More people are going to go into that business, and the seller's reservation price is the lowest price the seller will be willing to sell for. It's equal to the marginal cost. It's the cost of bringing in that next unit to market. And so here it is. We interpret the supply curve. We can think about it again, the horizontal method. Given price, how much will suppliers offer? At the price of $2, suppliers are willing to sell 8,000 slices a day. And the vertical interpretation is giving the quantity to be sold, what is the opportunity cost of the marginal seller? So the marginal cost of producing the 8,000 slice is $2. So that's really thinking very much from the perspective of the seller. It's like, is it worth it to them? That's the way to think about it. Now, we'll unpack a lot more of this on Thursday. We're zooming through it, some quite difficult ideas, you know. Okay, so you got your supply curve, you got your demand curve, and then you bring them together and you get to this wonderful idea of equilibrium. You know, equilibrium is where everything is at peace, you know. And so when the supply and demand have done their thing and everyone's come in and out of the market and people have decided whether they're going to buy or not, you know, it comes to a point where they're at equilibrium, it's solid. And then you have an equilibrium price, that's where supply and demand intersect, and the equilibrium quantity is the quantity at which the supply and demand intersect. And that is what's called market equilibrium. And at the equilibrium price, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. So it's, you know, it's really cool because there's these two completely separate things going on, but they've come together to form an equilibrium. And so this is how it looks, you know, in this market for pizzas. You know, people have gone in, people have decided to supply or not supply. People have demanded, you know, thought, okay, at $3, some people are out of the game, but there's a lot of people that are prepared to buy pizzas. So, you know, through all this sort of interaction, it's come to a point where the market price for pizzas is $3 per slice, and there's about 12,000 slices a day being sold. You know, that is market equilibrium. Okay, and we're going to unpack a lot more about this on Thursday. But you can say, okay, well, yeah, well, how do we get to that? It's through this process: excess supply and excess demand. So imagine this situation where we look at this excess supply. Imagine the situation's $4. At $4, there's not that many people wanting to buy, you know? You know, it's where $4 intersects with the demand curve. So it's only actually 8,000, you know, there's only demand for 8,000 slices. But because $4 is like, yeah, it's a good price, there's a lot of people who are willing to supply at that price. So there's actually 16,000 slices a day that people are prepared to supply. What does that mean? There's 8,000 slices a day that no one's buying. So if people are not buying pizza at the end of the day, what happens? The price goes down. And so what happens is excess supply leads to a surplus, and that pushes demand down, you know? Let's think about it the other way. If there's $2, the price is $2 for some reason, demand is going to be, yeah, everyone's wanting pizza at that price. You know, 16,000 slices a day, that people want it. But then people are thinking, I'm not going to make pizza, I might as well be doing something else. And so they're only producing 8,000 slices of pizza. And so what you do is you get this shortage. And it's like, hey, I want that pizza. No, I want that pizza. Okay, I'm prepared to spend a bit more on that pizza. And the price goes back up to the equilibrium. So in both cases, where the price is too high or the price is too low, it'll be pushed back to that equilibrium. And it's, you know, it's a good thing, you know. You know, so each supplier of that $4 has incentive to decrease the price in order to sell more, because the reality is that they're going to have all this pizza lying around unless they drop the price. So that's what's called the incentive principle. There's an incentive to drop the price, decreases the surplus, and then bit, bang, 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 until you get to the equilibrium, you know? And the same with the excess demand. If it's $2, suddenly everyone's going to be hungry, everyone wants that pizza, but no one's prepared to supply it. So those that are supplying it will, you know, will give it, you know, 2 or 3 people say, I want that pizza, I want that pizza. They'll raise the price, and bit by bit, it will go up, back until it gets to equilibrium. And that's the magic of the system. That's the magic of the supply and demand system. Okay, let's leave it there. There's a lot there. I've given you a lot there, but we're going to leave it for there, and we're going to unpack the rest of it on Thursday. Okay, see you soon.